A retired Navy SEAL walked into a quiet riverside tavern to escape his past, until a violent gang burst through the door, and the secret he spent years burying was suddenly exposed. In seconds, the peaceful tavern turned into a battlefield, and the only thing standing between innocent lives and disaster was the man who swore he'd never fight again. But when the gang leader recognized him, the ghost they failed to kill years ago, he realized this wasn't random. God had brought him here for a reason. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Rain pressed against the Portland waterfront in thin, slanting lines, whispering against the windows of Hayes's dockside tavern as if the river wind carried old secrets it wanted to spill. Inside, the tavern glowed with the tired warmth of a place that had survived too many winters and learned not to ask questions about the people who sheltered inside it. Logan Hayes pushed open the door with the quiet caution of someone who weighed spaces before entering them. He did not mean to move like a soldier, but habits built in deserts and alleys did not fade simply because years had passed. His body always searched for exits, assessed crowds, measured distances. Tonight was no different. He made his way toward the corner table where the wall sat firm behind him, where no sudden motion could appear at his back. Ranger trotted close beside him, the German shepherd's steps soft but purposeful, eyes scanning the room with a mirrored tension that came from a shared history neither man nor dog could explain in words. Ranger had once belonged to a K-9 program but was released early after reacting badly to certain training environments. Logan had found him at a shelter later, both of them pacing in their own ways, both bearing scars that weren't visible but shaped everything around them. As Logan sat, Ranger eased onto the floor in one fluid motion, posture relaxed only to those who didn't look closely. To Logan, it was obvious. The dog's breathing stayed shallow and alert, a creature trained for work but unsure where that work now belonged. The tavern held its usual churn of quiet voices. Two local regulars murmured at the bar about sports scores and rent hikes. Old Ben, who drifted through the waterfront bars like a man searching for something he'd lost decades ago, slept at his table, chin touching his chest. The jukebox played a song from the early 2000s, the kind of nostalgic melody that filled the room without demanding attention. And behind the counter was Emma Carter. She moved between tables with an ease that wasn't confidence, so much as grace learned from long nights on her feet. Emma had a gentle way of speaking that made people feel less frayed, even if she never pried into their stories. Her calmness was partly habit, partly necessity. She'd grown up in a home where she had to smooth storms before they erupted. Logan didn't know the details, but he saw hints of that resilience in the way she placed drinks quietly, the way her eyes softened around customers who looked tired. She approached his table with the same small smile she offered every night. "The usual?" she asked. Her tone held no expectation, only familiarity. Logan nodded once. Words always felt heavier than they were worth after long days, and Emma never made his silence feel rude. She returned moments later with a cold bottle, set it down gently, and left him to the quiet he clung to. Outside, thunder shuffled somewhere above the Willamette River. The air inside shifted subtly, as if some unseen rhythm had changed tempo. Logan felt the prickle first, a tightening at the base of his skull, the quiet snap of instincts sharpening. PTSD didn't explode inside him. It crept forward like fog, shaping the edges of the world into sharper outlines. Ranger sensed it too, his ears lifting, gaze cutting toward the tavern entrance. Logan set the bottle down slowly. He had learned long ago to trust the moments when the world's pace shifted beneath him. Moments like these were warnings, small, unmistakable ones. The tavern door didn't swing open. It detonated inward with the violent crack of splintering wood. A blast of cold wind and rain swept in with 5 hooded figures. The young couple in the booth gasped. One of the regulars cursed under his breath. Emma froze mid-step, the tray in her hand tilting dangerously before she caught herself. The intruders spread out with an almost choreographed urgency. Baseball bats glinted under the flickering lights. Their movements were tense, unstable, the kind of aggression that came from fear more than control. Logan knew that pattern well. Feral energy, young muscles, old desperation, the Riverside Crew. Their name had moved like whispered rumors across the docks, reckless, unpredictable, drawn to soft targets around the industrial edges of the city. Tonight, they had chosen the wrong tavern. Logan did not rise. Stillness served him better. His mind catalogued them in seconds. The jitter in the leader's hands, the limp in the leftmost man, the way another held a phone upright as if filming was a shield. The leader, Darius, though Logan didn't yet know his name, approached the counter and slammed his bat down hard enough to rattle bottles. "Open the safe!" he barked at Emma. She flinched, breath hitching, as her eyes darted toward the back room where a small safe held the evening's modest earnings. Logan saw the moment panic hit her chest, shoulders rising, fingers stiffening. But he also saw her steady herself, inhaling with intention. She had known fear before. Ranger rose, muscles quivering with restrained instinct. Logan pressed his foot lightly against the dog's flank, a silent order to hold. The last thing the room needed was escalation. One wrong movement and panic would turn into bloodshed. Logan lowered himself to the floor deliberately when ordered, hands behind his head. PTSD clawed at him as the planks pressed against his knees, memories of restraint, of raids gone wrong, of dark corners where breathing meant death. But he controlled his inhale, held steady, then exhaled through his nose. Emma's eyes met his briefly across the tavern. In that fleeting moment, she saw something she had not realized about him before. Steadiness under pressure, a quiet readiness, an edge carved by something far more dangerous than bar fights and drunk patrons. The leader retrieved the small cash bags from the safe, disappointed by how little there was. He, Chow-ji, cursed, kicking open the cash register for emphasis. The young couple whimpered. The regulars flattened themselves to the floor. Old Ben snored on, oblivious to terror. Logan felt a crucial shift when Darius hesitated, uncertain whether fear should morph into violence. This was the moment that determined how nights like this ended. "It's Tuesday," Logan said, voice calm but resonant. "There's no real money to take." Darius snapped toward him. "Shut up." But the crew glanced at each other, fear cracking through their bravado. Sirens whispered faintly outside, not close, not far, just enough to unravel the rest of their courage. Logan continued before the leader's panic turned fatal. "You've got what you came for. Walk out now. No one stops you." The room held stillness as tight as a drawn bowstring. Then, finally, the leader cursed under his breath, jerked his chin toward the door, and the Riverside Crew bolted into the rain. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Emma set the tray down on a table, her hands trembling as adrenaline drained. Ranger leaned against Logan gently, anchoring him back to the present. Logan exhaled deeply, relief mixing with the cold realization that this night had pulled a thread he had hoped would stay buried. Someone, somewhere, would notice what had happened here. Someone who shouldn't. He closed his eyes briefly. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one now waking inside the city's shadows. The lights of emergency vehicles washed across the Portland waterfront in pulsing streaks of red and blue, turning the rain-soaked pavement outside Hayes's Dockside Tavern into a trembling mirror of chaos and relief. Inside, the air felt strangely hollow, as if the violent intrusion from the Riverside Crew had carved out something fragile that still lingered in the corners. Emma stood behind the bar, arms crossed not out of defiance, but to steady the tremor in her ribs. She kept her gaze anchored on the officers who moved around the tavern marking evidence, her breath shallow as she replayed the moment a bat slammed inches from her hand. Logan watched the room with a quieter kind of tension. Kneeling earlier had stirred faded memories, and the mingled crackle of police radios now brushed against his nerves like static. He kept his posture open, non-threatening, though Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the unease inside him that he was trying to bury. Two investigators entered through the broken doorway, their presence drawing a noticeable shift in the room. Detective Sarah Whitford was the first. She carried herself with the discipline of someone who had learned to shoulder loss early in her career. There was a steadiness in her movement, shaped partly by the violent robbery years ago that cost her a close colleague, a story well known within the Major Crimes Unit, but rarely spoken aloud. Her partner, Detective Cole Morgan, followed her. He moved with measured caution, not out of fear, but because experience had taught him to read a room before his mouth got ahead of his instincts. Morgan had spent months tracking the Riverside crew, connecting dots others dismissed as random youth crime. Now, the moment he stepped into the tavern, he sensed this was different from every report they had logged before. Whitford approached Emma first, offering calm questions, softened by an understanding of trauma. Emma answered them with halting breaths, describing what she saw, how the door broke, how the young man with the shaking voice demanded the safe. But her eyes drifted toward Logan each time, her mind circling the strange moment when he spoke, and the entire tavern seemed to shift course. Morgan noticed and turned to Logan. "You handled yourself like someone who's seen this before," he said, not accusingly, but as an observation. Logan kept his tone neutral. "I paid attention." Morgan frowned slightly, sensing the answer was technically true, but incomplete. He had learned to feel the weight of unsaid things. "We'll need your fingerprints for the witness record," Whitford added. Logan agreed with a simple nod. He had known this was coming since the second he activated the silent alert hidden near his boot. The routine evidence collection unfolded smoothly until one of the younger officers called Whitford over, speaking in a low tone. Then Whitford's gaze shifted toward Logan with a sharpened awareness. The fingerprint scan had unlocked a restricted profile. Logan felt the change in the air the way some men sensed approaching storms. Whitford and Morgan led him to a quieter corner of the tavern, away from Emma and the other witnesses. Ranger followed without needing instruction. "Your name is Logan Hayes," Whitford began carefully, "but your service record doesn't match the civilian identity on paper." Logan inhaled slowly. Even that breath felt heavier than he wanted. "I served," he said simply. Morgan studied him, not like a threat, but like a missing puzzle piece. "You didn't just serve. You were part of a federal operation targeting Red Harbor Syndicate, and your involvement didn't end quietly." Logan didn't confirm or deny immediately. His silence was enough for the detectives to understand the truth lived close under his skin, buried but not dead. He finally answered, voice steady. "My team brought down a man named Elliot Crane. He didn't take it well." Whitford exchanged a knowing glance with her partner. She had seen revenge cases sprawl over decades. "The attempts on your life in California?" she said softly. That was him. Logan nodded. Emma, who hadn't meant to overhear but stood closer than intended, felt a cold shiver run through her. She had sensed there was something deeper in Logan's calmness, but hearing that a criminal syndicate had once tried to eliminate him felt like the floor had shifted under her. Before Whitford could continue, a figure appeared at the broken threshold of the tavern. He seemed out of place among the uniforms, tailored jacket, smooth gait, composed face that wore polite danger like an accessory. Carlo Vega. His presence did not raise weapons among officers, but it did cause Morgan's jaw to tighten. Carlo introduced himself with the kind of courtesy that felt more like a blade concealed behind silk. He claimed to represent a concerned business party invested in keeping the waterfront safe. though his tone suggested something far more personal. His eyes lingered on Logan with familiarity that made the detective stiffen. Emma stepped back instinctively, sensing danger in his controlled charm. "My employer would like to speak with you," Carlos said smoothly to Logan. "He appreciates people who keep order when things lose direction." The implication was clear enough that Whitford moved subtly between them, but Carlo only smiled, unfazed by police presence. He set a business card on the table nearest to Logan and walked out as if he had just delivered a dinner invitation instead of a threat. The moment he left, Morgan exhaled sharply. "That wasn't random," Whitford agreed. "Crane knows where you are, and he sent someone to say hello." Logan felt Ranger press closer, the dog's silent intuition confirming what Logan already understood. Tonight's robbery hadn't simply been bad luck. It had stirred the surface of a pond where old predators were still swimming. Emma approached cautiously once the detective stepped aside. Her voice was softer than usual, touched with worry. "Is someone after you?" Logan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the broken door, the rain-soaked street beyond it, the flashing lights reflecting off wet concrete. He looked at Ranger, whose eyes seemed to ask the same question. When he turned back to Emma, his expression held the weight of a man who had spent years trying to outrun the truth. "They found me," he murmured. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was the quiet confirmation of a past cracking open. Outside, the storm over the river deepened, as if the night itself listened. And somewhere east of the docks, in a smoke-filled private room, Elliot Crane was certainly listening too. Tomorrow there would be a meeting, but no one in the tavern, not even Logan, fully knew how dangerous that meeting would be, or who else would choose that moment to step back into the shadows he had tried so hard to leave behind. Rain thinned into a mist that clung to the edges of Portland's waterfront, softening the harsh outlines of warehouses and casting the tavern district in a ghost-like haze. Morning had not yet broken, but the city's shadows were already awake, whispering through alleys and slipways like messengers carrying news no one wanted. Logan Hayes moved through the quiet with Ranger at his side, the dog's steps precise, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of alertness sharpened by the previous night. Logan's mind felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the familiar clarity that came when danger began aligning its pieces. He had spent years trying to let the world become small and predictable again. Last night proved how quickly it could expand into something vast and threatening. When he returned to the tavern later that day, the broken door had been temporarily patched, the lights dimmer, and a lingering nervous energy seemed to cling to the wooden beams. Emma Carter stood behind the counter, speaking softly to a carpenter who was measuring the damaged frame. She noticed Logan first, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly. Relief mixed with worry she hadn't figured out how to name. "You came back," she said, her voice carrying the careful warmth of someone who didn't want to push too far. Logan gave a small nod. Ranger brushed past his leg, gravitating toward Emma with the quiet trust he rarely extended to strangers. Emma reached down to stroke the dog gently, her hand lingering just long enough to tell Logan she was grateful he was safe. But beneath that gratitude was a question. Several, in fact. She didn't ask any. Not yet. A few hours later, the detectives returned. Sarah Whitford and Cole Morgan took a booth near the back, spreading files across the table. They waved Logan over with a seriousness that settled like weight on the air. Ranger followed, slipping beneath the table, positioning himself between Logan and the entrance without being told. Whitford began the briefing with no preamble. "We ran background on Carlo Vega," she said. "He's been connected to 2 suspected extortion patterns and 1 disappearance linked to the Red Harbor Syndicate. None of it sticks because he never gets his hands dirty." Morgan leaned forward. "But showing up here last night? That's unusual. Crane doesn't expose his circle unless he has a reason. Logan understood the implication immediately. His presence at the tavern had become part of someone else's equation. Whitford continued. If Crane wants a meeting, he'll choose neutral ground, a place he controls, but that won't draw attention. Logan's jaw tightened. Harborview Social Club, he said quietly. Morgan nodded grimly. Exactly. The club was a place Logan knew by reputation, a facade of exclusivity masking backroom deals and quiet threats. It was where Crane had once built alliances strong enough to keep entire blocks of Portland under his influence. It was also where Logan's involvement years ago had dismantled half of those alliances. "If I refuse?" Logan asked. "He escalates," Whitford replied. "Maybe quietly, maybe not." Emma approached before Morgan could respond. She set coffee in front of each of them, but her gaze stayed on Logan just a heartbeat longer. "He came into my workplace," she said softly. "This isn't just about you now." Her words settled over the table with a truth Logan had been trying to avoid. Ranger shifted, sensing the tension. Logan placed a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder. Whitford added, "If you agree to the meeting, we can wire you up. Safely. You won't be alone." Logan stared into the dark surface of his coffee. He didn't want to return to that world, but he also knew men like Crane did not retreat just because their target wished for a quiet life. Silence only encouraged them. Refusing the meeting meant pushing danger outward, toward the tavern, toward Emma, toward anyone Crane might use to send a message. He had spent years believing distance protected others. Now he saw how quickly danger could arrive at someone else's door. "I'll go," Logan said finally. Whitford exhaled, not in relief, but in acceptance. Morgan gave a sharp nod. Ranger lifted his head as if recognizing the shift from waiting into action. Later, after the detectives left to prepare the recording equipment, Logan stayed behind as Emma swept bits of shattered glass from the floor the police had missed. She didn't look up when she spoke. "You're walking into something dangerous, aren't you?" Logan hesitated. "Yes." She continued sweeping, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her calm tone. "And you weren't planning to tell me." Logan had no answer. Emma set the broom aside, resting her hands on the counter. "I don't want to know everything," she said gently. "But I want to know enough to not be blindsided again. Is that fair?" Logan met her gaze. There was no accusation in her expression, only concern threaded with quiet resilience. Someone who had grown up dealing with storms she never asked for. Someone who, despite fear, stood her ground when the Riverside crew burst in. He owed her honesty, or as much as he could safely give. "I used to be part of a team that took down dangerous people," he said, voice measured. "One of them is still out there. He thinks I'm a loose end." Emma remained still, absorbing the weight of his confession. "And last night, that wasn't a coincidence." "No." She nodded slowly. "Then whatever happens next, don't shut me out entirely. Not if there's something coming." Logan didn't promise, but he didn't walk away either. Evening settled over the tavern as he and Ranger stepped outside. The sky bruised to dark purple, and the first hint of fog rolled off the river like breath. Logan studied the distant lights of the industrial district where the Yahoo Harborview Social Club stood. He could almost feel Crane's presence there, quiet, calculating, patient. Ranger growled softly, nose lifting into the wind. Logan followed the dog's gaze. A black sedan sat idling half a block down, windows tinted, engine too still for a casual passerby. When Logan took a single step in its direction, the sedan pulled away, disappearing around the bend. Logan stood motionless. Ranger's growl vibrated through the leash. Tomorrow's meeting was no longer just an invitation, it was a message. Crane was already watching, And somewhere in the tension of that quiet street, Logan felt the unmistakable truth. The storm had not yet arrived, but it was coming. Evening settled over Portland with an unnatural stillness, as if the city were bracing for a storm the sky had not yet announced. Fog drifted low across the waterfront warehouses, softening the outlines of steel railings and casting dim halos around the lamps near Hayes's dockside tavern. Inside, the tavern felt quieter than usual, not empty, but subdued, as though everyone sensed the tension in the air and spoke just softly enough not to disturb it. Logan Hayes sat at his usual corner table with Ranger beside him, the dog alert but silent. Logan's mind replayed the words exchanged earlier with the detectives. The plan was simple on paper. Tomorrow he would meet Elliot Crane at Harborview Social Club, wearing a covert transmitter. In reality, plans involving men like Crane were never simple, and both Logan and Ranger felt the weight of uncertainty settling around them like a tightening fog. Emma Carter wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate motions. She wasn't avoiding eye contact. She was studying him in the quiet way people with gentle hearts tried to make sense of danger they didn't fully understand. Since learning that Logan wasn't just a quiet veteran hiding from his own memories, Emma had become more aware of the shadows that clung to him. Not afraid of him, but afraid for him. The tavern door opened, and 3 new customers stepped inside. They didn't fit the usual pattern of regulars or late-night wanderers. Their movements were too controlled, too in sync, their gazes too focused. The first man, a sharply dressed figure with cold poise, surveyed the room with the detached curiosity of someone evaluating threats. His name, as Logan recognized him instantly, was Carlo Vega. Behind him were 2 men built like moving walls, their expressions unreadable. They wore no visible weapons, but Logan knew enough to assume they were armed in ways that didn't show. Emma stiffened, her grip tightening on the cloth she held. Ranger rose to his feet, positioning himself between the strangers and Logan without command. Carlo offered a smile, the kind of smile meant to appear warm, though its edges were sharp. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight," he said, voice smooth as polished metal. Logan didn't reply immediately. He glanced toward the few customers lingering in the tavern. An old fisherman near the window, a couple sharing fries in a booth. Emma's eyes flicked to the door, calculating whether she should call the detectives. But Carlo's relaxed posture told Logan he didn't come for violence. Not yet. Carlo approached the counter, tapping a fingertip lightly on the polished wood. "Tomorrow's meeting," he said, turning toward Logan with precise calmness. "My employer wants assurance that you will attend." Logan kept his tone even. "I gave my answer." "Yes," Carlo replied, "but some men say things they do not mean. My employer dislikes being disappointed." The unspoken threat hung in the air, like the charged silence before lightning. Emma's breath hitched. Logan saw it, even though she tried to mask it. He stood, not abruptly, but with deliberate steadiness, stepping away from the table. Carlo's guards shifted slightly, watching Ranger, who tracked their movements with narrowed focus. Logan moved closer, keeping his body between Emma and the men without drawing attention to the intention. "You came all this way to repeat what Crane already said?" he asked. "Not exactly," Carlo replied. "There's another message." Before Logan could respond, the tavern glass beside the entryway shattered violently. The explosion of sound jolted every customer into instinctive panic. A brick tumbled across the wooden floor, trailing shards of fractured glass. Emma gasped and ducked behind the counter. Ranger growled, deep and resonant, stepping forward as razor-thin edges sparkled across the floor. Carlo didn't flinch. "My employer grows impatient," he said softly. The 2 guards stepped forward, closing the space between them and Logan. The tavern's few patrons scrambled away, some rushing out the back, others dropping to the floor. Logan didn't move his feet, but his posture shifted subtly, shoulders angled, weight balanced, ready to act without provoking. Emma's trembling voice broke through the tension. "Please, stop," she said, rising from behind the counter before she realized what she was doing. Logan felt the jolt of fear surge through him. She had stepped into the open, instinctively placing herself close to danger. Carlo raised an eyebrow in mild amusement. "Brave," he said, "but unnecessary." One of the guards moved toward Emma. Ranger lunged forward half a step, teeth bared, but Logan caught the dog's collar, grounding him. Logan stepped in front of Emma in a single controlled motion, shielding her from the guard without saying a word. Carlo tilted his head. "Interesting," he murmured. "You really do care about this place." Before anything escalated further, a rumble of engines approached outside. A moment later, the tavern door burst inward, not from attackers this time, but from armed officers in tactical gear shouting commands. The major crimes unit had arrived. Whitford moved first, weapon drawn, followed by Morgan and a team that swept into the room with swift precision. "Hands where we can see them," Whitford ordered. Carlo didn't resist. He raised his hands with an almost amused expression, as if he'd anticipated this show of force. His guards hesitated, but seeing the number of officers, they complied. Morgan advanced, securing them while his team dispersed through the tavern. When Carlo was cuffed, he leaned toward Logan just slightly, his voice low, but clear enough for Logan alone. "You may not walk out of tomorrow's meeting," he said, "but that is your choice." Whitford pulled him back sharply, ending the exchange. Emma rushed to Logan the moment Carlo and his men were escorted outside. Her hands shook as she reached out, then drew back, unsure whether touching him would ground her or unravel her. "Are you hurt?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Are you?" she swallowed. "Just scared." Ranger nudged her hand gently, an unspoken reassurance. Whitford approached them, eyes still burning from the adrenaline of the raid. "We got enough from what Carlo said to justify detaining him," she said. "And Darius Wells came in earlier today. He's ready to talk, fully." Logan blinked. "He came voluntarily?" "He did," Whitford confirmed. "And he's terrified of Crane." Morgan added, "Between Darius's statements and whatever you record tomorrow, we might finally have the leverage to take Crane down." Emma looked between them, understanding now that tomorrow was not just a dangerous meeting, it was a turning point. Logan felt the weight of that truth settle across his shoulders. Tomorrow the balance would tip, either toward justice or toward blood. And as he stepped outside into the cold night air with Ranger at his side, he saw headlights flicker across the harbor fog. Not police, not pedestrians. Something else. Someone watching. Waiting. Crane's reach was already moving toward him, and tomorrow Logan would step directly into the center of it. Morning light spread softly across the Portland waterfront, brushing the river with pale gold as the fog lifted in thin strands above the industrial skyline. The world looked deceptively calm, as if unaware that a long-buried conflict would reach its breaking point before the day ended. Logan Hayes walked with Ranger at his side toward the district east of the docks, where the Harborview Social Club sat hidden behind polished glass doors and a facade of exclusivity. The dog's posture was tense, sensing the gravity of the morning, and Logan's own breathing carried the steady rhythm of a man who had accepted that whatever happened inside that building would shape the rest of his life. Earlier, Detectives Whitford and Morgan briefed him again in a concealed van near the block. They fitted the small transmitter beneath his shirt, its weight almost imperceptible but symbolically heavy, like a thin thread connecting him to every officer waiting for a signal. Whitford rested a careful hand on his arm before he stepped out. She didn't say, "Good luck." She said, "Come back." Morgan added only that they would move in as soon as they had proof strong enough to justify a raid. Logan understood the risk. Crane had survived so long because he knew how to keep conversations vague, threats implied, and criminality always 1 degree removed from his hands. Logan would have to guide the conversation into dangerous clarity. Ranger watched him with a steady gaze before being led back into the van with an officer who promised to keep him safe until the operation ended. Logan hesitated only a moment before letting the leash drop. Ranger grumbled, sensing separation, sensing the weight of what Logan was about to walk into. Logan whispered something low, a reassurance only the dog understood, then straightened and crossed the street toward the club's entrance. Inside, he immediately noticed the shift in atmosphere. The interior was dim, quiet, and cold in its refinement. A man in a dark suit stood by the bar polishing a glass, though his eyes betrayed the fact that he was no bartender, simply a guard filling silence. Another man by the back wall, tall and rigid, was positioned more like a lookout than a server. These weren't employees, they were pieces on Crane's board. Elliot Crane entered the room moments later. He was older than when Logan last saw him, but the charisma that shaped his empire still clung to him like a shadow. He had the presence of someone accustomed to people stepping aside whenever he entered a space. Crane studied him with an expression both curious and calculating. "Logan Hayes," he said, voice smooth with old familiarity. "You're a difficult man to kill." Logan didn't sit when Crane gestured to a chair. He remained standing deliberately, asserting control without hostility. "I'm not here to revisit the past," he said. "You wanted a meeting. Say what you need to say." Crane's smile tightened slightly, irritation blooming at the refusal to play by his unspoken rules. "All I need is simple," Crane replied. "Stay out of my affairs. The city has moved on. You should have too." Logan held his ground. "Your people attacked a tavern full of civilians. Carlo threatened workers there. Your crew has been escalating for months. I won't let people get dragged into this." "Dragged?" Crane's eyebrow lifted. "You walked willingly into someone else's business years ago. Red Harbor Syndicate would still be functioning if you had not interfered." "It was trafficking," Logan said. "Your business had a cost. People paid it." Crane waved the words away lightly, as though morality were an outdated concept. "You took something from me. I sought balance. It should have ended when you disappeared. Yet here you are again, disrupting the equilibrium." Logan saw the opening he needed, Crane admitting motive, admitting connection to violence, but the man was too experienced to hand over full confession. Logan pressed calmly. "Your men came to the tavern again last night. They shattered a window. The officers took them in. They're talking now." "I'm sure they are," Crane said, tone cool. "Weak men always talk." He stepped closer, his voice lowering into threat. "But the only story that matters is the one where you walk out of Portland and never return." Logan felt the transmitter against his skin. He needed just one more solid link, one connection between Crane and the actions of his subordinates. "Carlos said you sent him," Logan said, "and you didn't deny it just now." Crane's eyes shifted ever so slightly. A small tell, but a meaningful one. Before he could redirect the conversation, the back door of the club creaked open and a young man stumbled in. Darius Wells. His face held fear sharpened by guilt. He glanced at Logan before turning to Crane. "I'm done," Darius said, breath shaky. "I'm not going to be part of this anymore." Crane barely looked at him. "You're not done until I decide it." Darius's courage wavered, but he didn't leave. Logan recognized the internal war inside the boy, the same war he saw in younger soldiers who weren't prepared for the weight of their choices. "He doesn't control you," Logan said quietly, but his voice carried through the hollow room. Crane's composure slipped. Rage flickered like a match. "You," he said, stepping closer to Logan, "keep pushing where you don't belong. This city isn't made for heroes." And that was it. the line that tied Crane to everything, his orchestration, his intent, his retaliation, and the one thing the transmitter would send live to the waiting officers. Logan didn't have time to respond. The club doors burst open as Whitford, Morgan, and a tactical team stormed the room. Commands filled the air, sharp and echoing against lacquered walls. Crane stiffened as officers pressed him against the Siha bar. His empire, years in the making, cracked apart in seconds. Darius collapsed into a chair, shaking with relief he wasn't ready to understand yet. Logan exhaled for the first time since entering the building. When Whitford approached him, she didn't smile. She only nodded, knowing the cost of this moment. Hours later, as the sun dipped low and the tavern glowed warmly against the evening, Logan returned to Hayes's dockside. Emma stood outside, sweeping the walkway. When she saw him, relief washed across her features so strongly she had to steady herself. Ranger bounded toward him from the nearby van, tail low but moving with a joy restrained only by discipline. Logan knelt, pressing his forehead briefly to the dog's. The day's tension dissolved in that simple contact. Emma stepped closer, voice soft but full of something new and certain. "It's over?" Logan looked at the river, where the last light of day shimmered like a path being cleared. "I think so," he said. Crane would face charges that would hold. Darius and his mother had been moved into protective custody. The tavern would finally sleep without fear. Emma placed a hand over his, gently grounding him. "Good," she whispered. The quiet of the night felt different now, not fragile, but earned. Logan understood that he had stopped running, not because the danger vanished, but because he found something worth standing still for. And as the harbor wind carried the last echoes of the storm away, he walked back into the tavern beside Emma and Ranger, knowing the peace he felt tonight wasn't borrowed. It was finally his. Miracles in life rarely arrive with bright wings or heavenly trumpets. More often, they appear quietly through ordinary people carrying extraordinary burdens. A retired Navy SEAL haunted by the past, a gentle waitress who chose compassion over fear, and a loyal German shepherd whose courage spoke louder than words. None of them crossed paths by accident. God often works in ways we cannot see, guiding broken hearts toward healing and lighting a path even when we believe we are walking alone. Logan thought his life had shattered beyond repair, yet God used his deepest wounds to lead him back to truth, purpose, and a sense of belonging he believed was lost forever. And perhaps somewhere in your own life, God is sending a Ranger, an Emma, or a small quiet sign to remind you that you are never alone and that His plan continues even in your darkest moments. If you have ever carried sorrow, regret, fear, or long nights that felt endless, remember this: God has not forgotten you. He walks beside you, shaping your story with love and intention. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and protection today and always. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment telling me what part resonated most with you, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue walking together through stories of faith, healing, and hope. May God watch over you, guide you, and remind you in every quiet moment that you are deeply, deeply loved.